الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على من بعث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وبعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, we'll continue with the tafsir of Surah Nisa from ayah number 19 today, inshallah. So we'll probably cover 19, 20, and maybe 21. So these 2-3 ayahs together, main topic is, as you know, the surah is An-Nisa, it's women, translated as women or the women. And the reason is because many of the ahkam, many of the guidance in the surah and the laws are revealed about different types of women and their rights and the laws that surround those types of women. So you saw in the beginning of Surah Nisa, talking about orphan girls. Then there was something around inheritance. There was something around marriage. There'll be something on inheritance again. There's more ayahs on marriage, divorce, who you can marry from women, etc. So these 2-3 ayahs, what they discuss is, number one, it changes some of the laws in this surah. They're completely new legislation from Islam. Some of the laws come to abolish previous customs. So in this surah you'll see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals ayah, verse, to abolish previous customs that are damaging and oppressive to women. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in these ayahs will talk about not harming women, especially in the previous custom, how they used to inherit women. After the husband dies, the husband's family would inherit the woman like property. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will abolish this rule and this permission. And He will also talk about not taking back the mahar. Once you pay the dowry, the mahar to the woman, normally the baseline situation is not to take it back. If you're going to divorce her, not to take it back. And there's a big warning about that. And generally to live in equity, treat them fairly, to live in dignity with your family, with your wives. So these are the 2-3 main topics of these 3 ayahs. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins, يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يحل لكم أن ترثوا النساء كرها ولا تعضلوهن لتذهبوا ببعض ما آتيتموهن إلا أن يأتين بفاحشة مبينة وعاشروهن بالمعروف فإن كرهتموهن فعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا ويجعل الله فيه خيرا كثيرا. O believers, it is not permissible for you to inherit women against their will or mistreat them to make them return some of their dowry, mahar, as a ransom for divorce, in brackets, unless they are found guilty of adultery. Treat them fairly. If you happen to dislike them, you may hate something which Allah turns into a great blessing. So before these ayahs, last week, we were talking about repentance. That before these ayahs were the ayahs of tawbah, right? And as I said, before that there were other ayahs relating to different status or different types of women in different situations. So now we come back to the topic of women again in Surah An-Nisa. Here, the first thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is, O believers, it is not permissible for you to inherit women against their will or mistreat them to make them return some of the dowry, in brackets, as a ransom for divorce, unless they are found guilty of adultery. What used to happen before Islam, in the Jahiliyyah, before these ayahs were revealed, the normal practice amongst the Arabs, especially in Medina, was that the family inherits the woman. So even the son would marry the stepmother after the father passes away. Not his own mother, but stepmother. Or one of the brothers, or some other male member of the family would inherit the woman after her husband passes away, just like property, right? Secondly, they would not pay any dowry, any new mahar towards that woman. It'll simply be they inherited her. Thirdly, often if that woman was rich or inherited some money from her husband, this new person who inherits her or marries her would get her for free, basically. And he would harm her or keep her holding on to her with a view to inherit from her afterwards. So these are the ways in which these women were mistreated, were oppressed, were done injustice to. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it very clear, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا يَحِلُّ لَكُمْ أَن تَرِثُوا النِّسَاءَ كَرْهًا. O believers, it is not permissible for you to inherit women against their will. Against their will, karhan, here, it's not a condition. It doesn't mean if they agree and it's not against their will, it's okay to inherit them. No. It's just a statement of fact. This is how it's done. They used to do it obviously against the women's will. But it's not a condition. Even if they agree to it, you're not allowed to inherit women. Even if the woman agrees that I don't mind being inherited. No, Sharia is banning, prohibiting that practice from Jahiliyyah, from the days of ignorance. Al-Bukhari recorded that Ibn Abbas said about the ayah, that, O you who believe, you are not permitted to inherit women against their will. He said that before, the practice was that when a man dies, his male relatives used to have the right to do whatever they wanted with his wife. If one of them wants, he would marry her, give her in marriage, give her away in marriage, or prevent her from marriage, for they had more right to her than her own family. Thereafter, this ayah was revealed about this practice. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا يَحِلُّ لَكُمْ أَن تَرِثُوا النِّسَاءَ كَرْهًا. So Ibn Abbas says this, it's in Bukhari, that this was the practice. So this ayah has come to ban that practice. Women are not allowed to be inherited. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala added, وَلَا تَعْدُلُوهُنَّ لِتَذْهَبُوا بِبَعْدِ مَا آتَيْتُمُوهُنَّ. And nor prevent them from marriage in order to take a part of what you have given them. So this applies to the previous Jahiliyyah as well as after that. It applies within Islam as well. Even if someone didn't inherit, but it's just a normal marriage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, do not treat the women harshly so that she gives back all of or part of her dowry that she was given and forfeits one of her rights by means of coercion or oppression. Meaning that don't treat her harshly, don't abuse her, don't force her to leave the marriage whereby she says, you know what, take your mahar, or I don't want the mahar. If it was credit, you haven't paid yet, she says, I don't need the mahar, just divorce me. Or where she says, I'll give you the money back, just divorce me. So don't do that. It applies to the previous as well, where they inherited the woman, they kept her without mahar or anything. Obviously that practice is banned. So it can apply to a normal marriage as well. That do not harm your wives in order to take money back from them. The dowry or the mahar, this is the right of the woman. You have no right to take it back, right? Except, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِلَّا أَن يَأْتِينَ بِفَاحِشَةٍ مُبَيِّنَةٍ. Unless they commit open fahisha. What is fahisha? Ibn Mas'ud, Ibn Abbas, other Sahabi and Tabi'in, they all said that this refers to zina, illicit sexual relations outside of marriage. Meaning that if the wife commits adultery, you are allowed to take back the dowry you gave to her. The mahar you gave to her, you're allowed to take it back. Or if you owed her the mahar, you're allowed to withhold it and divorce her. Even in Surah Al-Baqarah, as we covered a while back, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that ولا يحل لكم أن تأخذوا مما آتيتموهن شيئا إلا أن يخافا ألا يقيما حدود الله. And it is not lawful for you, meaning men, to take back from your wives any of what you have given them, except when both parties fear that they would not be able to keep the limits ordained by Allah. So the general rule is that the mahr that is paid to the wife, under no circumstance can you take that back, especially if you're the one who's divorcing. If you're the one who's divorcing, it's a normal divorce, she hasn't done anything, you cannot take the mahr back from her. Or if you owe her, you must pay that mahr, the dowry. You can't withhold it. You can't harm her in any way in order for her to give up and force and say, you know what, keep the mahr, I'll give you the money back, just let me go, whatever. So this is the general rule. The only exception mentioned in the ayah, إِلَّا أَن يَأْتِينَ بِفَاحِشَةٍ مُبَيِّنَةٍ, unless she comes or she commits something, a clear fahisha. And as I said, the majority view is the fahisha here refers to adultery, sexual relations. There's a minority view, there's a different view as well, that few others mentioned from Sahabi as well as Tabi'een, that here fahisha refers to disobedience and defiance, not just sexual relations, disobedience, severe disobedience, something significant, or defiance, some kind of disobedience in a significant way that harms the household, that brings the household to a kind of to a crisis, if you like. So these are the two opinions, but the majority went with that this is only in the case of fahisha, meaning zina, adultery. Then you can ask for the money back and etc. But in general, I mean, the Hanafis have something which is slightly different, which is khul'a. That's when there's not necessarily anyone to blame, like she hasn't done anything severe like here, nothing to do with sexual illicit relations, nothing to do with that. But whatever reason, the marriage is broken down and the wife wants release from the marriage. But there's, the husband, it may be because of him, whatever, but neither party has done something so drastic where the judge would have said, you need to separate. So if she asks for the divorce in that sense, which is called a khul'a, a release, then the husband is allowed to take some of the mahar back, or even the mahar itself. They can, whatever they agree mutually, she can release herself by giving that payment. But generally, if you're the one who's divorcing, because in the next ayah you'll see, it may be because you want to marry again, it may be you have 4 wives, you want to marry a 5th one, you can't because 4 is the limit, and you want to replace one of them. Or you may have 1 wife, and you just want to replace her with somebody different. In that case, then the mahar is her absolute right. You have no authority to harm her with a view to taking that back. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ended this ayah by saying, وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, right? Treat them fairly or live with them honorably. Treat them fairly, or you can translate it as live with them, عَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, with honor, dignity, with what is known to be good. Treat them well. فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. If you happen to dislike them, you may hate something which Allah turns into a great blessing, which Allah has made خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا in it. There's a lot of khair in it. So some of the mufassirun said, treat them honorably, treat them fairly means by saying kind words to them, treating them kindly, making your appearance good and appealing to them, just as you want them to make their appearance good and appealing to you. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in another ayah, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ, and they have rights, meaning the women have rights over them, as to just as the men do, as to what is reasonable. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِهِ وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِي. The best amongst you is he who is best to his family, to his wife, to his family. Verily, I am the best one amongst you with my family. It was the practice of the Prophet ﷺ to be extremely cheerful, kind, playful with his wives, compassionate, spending on them, laughing with them. The Prophet ﷺ, of course, he used to also teach them, it wasn't always just joking and laughing. Of course, it's a balance. When he needed to be strict on something, he would be. When he needed to teach them, guide them on something, he would. But generally, his demeanor was very soft, kind, cheerful, and happy at home. As we know, famous story of the Prophet ﷺ, he even raised Aisha radiallahu anha, mother of the believers. He raised her once, and she won that race, the mother of the believers radiallahu anha. She won that race, and then later on, she raced him again, and she lost. And she said, the Prophet said, this is for that one, the one you beat me for. And she said, Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, she narrates that I put on a bit of weight, that's why Prophet beat me in this one. So he used to play with them, he used to laugh with them, he was easy with them. And when the Prophet was at the home of one of his wives, if it was one of the wives' night, sometimes all of his wife would meet there and eat together. And then the other wives would go home, and the Prophet ﷺ would stay with whichever wife it was her turn. So this is how the Prophet ﷺ, he used to treat them with dignity, live with them honorably, treat them fairly, kindly, with compassion. Then the next line where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. If you happen to dislike them, you may hate something which Allah turns into a great blessing. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala saying here? The first thing is that فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ is a conditional sentence. It's a shart, right? A conditional sentence has a response of the condition, right? But it's omitted here. So what they said is, it means that if you happen to dislike them, do not rush and separate from them. Do not rush to divorce. Do not rush to make your mind up and just separate. If you happen to dislike them, if you happen to dislike something about your wife, don't make your mind up within 3 days, within 1 day, within 1 hour, or you've just been married for a few days or a few weeks. Don't make your mind up. Don't rush and just divorce them. This is the omission from the ayah. This is what the Mufassirun said, because فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ, this is the shartiya, jumla shartiya, there's a conditional sentence here. But the answer is, or the second part to that conditional sentence is omitted, meaning don't rush and just separate or make your decision, even if you dislike something about them. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that that perhaps you may hate something which Allah turns into a great blessing, or that He's already made the way it's in the ayah, وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, or He will make in it, or He will create in it, خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, much goodness, much blessings, right? Ibn Abbas commented on this ayah, and he said that the husband may feel compassion to towards his wife if he's patient. He may feel compassion to his wife, and then Allah may give them a child with her, he has a child with her, and then this child carries tremendous goodness. So the khair may not be necessarily you're going to see it immediately in your wife. It may be as a result of being patient and staying, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses you with righteous children or a righteous child, and you see much khair in that child, and that transforms your household, that transforms your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It transforms your destiny with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In an authentic hadith that Ibn Kathir says is authentic in his tafsir, لا يفرق مؤمن مؤمنة إن سخط منها خلقا رضي منها آخر. No believing man should hate his believing wife. If he dislikes a part of her conduct, he would surely like another. So the Prophet ﷺ is attributed to the Prophet ﷺ that he said that no believer should hate his believing wife. If he dislikes a part of her conduct, he would surely like another. Meaning nobody's perfect, whether it's the husband or the wife or a brother or a sister. Nothing in life is perfect, nothing, whatever you have. Because this ayah is not just for the wife. Because its main principle is in Surah Al-Baqarah, which is more generic, right? Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ. That perhaps you hate a thing and it is good for you. And perhaps you love a thing and it is bad for you, it's harmful for you. So that's a general principle, although in Surah Al-Baqarah, this was revealed with regards to jihad, because qital, because the command for going to battle. And some of the people found that hard, difficult, right? So Allah said, perhaps you find this difficult or you don't like to go and risk your life, but وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ. This is good for you. This is beneficial for you. Or the opposite, perhaps you love something. You love to be living in peace and no troubles, nobody's attacking you, no enemies, you're in pure safety all the time. This is what they wanted instead of, some of them wanted that instead of having to go and fight. But perhaps that, you love that, but whilst it is bad for you. And the ayah ends that Allah knows, you do not know. So this is a general principle, but here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is relating it directly to the wife that you may not, or you may find something or many things that you don't like about her. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is relating it directly to the wife, but even then, He's leaving it quite general as well, because it starts off, فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا. Yeah? فَإِن كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ. It starts off with them, referring to them directly. If you happen to dislike them, the women, كَرِهْتُمُوهُنَّ. But it kind of follows in a very generic term. It says, فَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُ شَيْئًا. Perhaps you may hate something. It doesn't say perhaps you may hate her or her behavior or something like that. And then Allah says, وَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. And Allah turns it into a great blessing. It didn't say it turns her into a great blessing. It includes the wife, of course. But all I'm saying is, even here, Allah's making it a very general thing, although it's, of course, very related in this ayah to the wife. But it's a generic principle for all things in life. In other words, if you in this ayah specifically, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that you can find something which is you don't like, right? Or more than one thing, many things that you don't like in your wife. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, don't rush. Don't give up in the first week or the first month or the first year. Stick with it. Be patient. You do your job. You live with good nobility and dignity and fairness and compassion and treat them kindly. If you stick to that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that perhaps He will make something great from it, a great blessing. Now, that could be in the dunya, Like Ibn Abbas said, it could be a child. It might not be in her directly. You might say, I've been patient for all these years, nothing's changing. It could be in something else. It could be in your child. Or it may not be in the dunya, right? It may be in the akhirah. That because you stuck and you were patient and you said that, no, I'm going to do my job, which is to treat her with compassion and kindness and mercy and fulfill my duties, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant you a great reward in the akhirah. So it could be in the dunya, it could be in the akhirah, it could be both, in the dunya and akhirah. Whichever way, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make something there. Now, someone may say, but what's the limit? How much and vice versa? What about the woman? Does she have to do the same thing? It's related to the man here because it's in the man's hand or it's in his authority to give the divorce, etc. But like I said, it's a general principle, applies to everybody and everything in life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may command something. You might find something in Sharia, in some of the things that we have to do as an obligation. And for you to fulfill that, you may find some difficulty. For example, to stick to a halal means of income, you may find difficulty in doing that. But if you stick to it, right, there will be difficulty, there will be things you don't like, but if you stick with it and it's difficult, and maybe you're not earning as much, maybe you can't fulfill your dreams, if you stick with it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make something great out of that. He will make much khairan kathiran in it. So this is the thing, is a general principle for everybody, for all things, not just husband and wife, but here, of course, it's related to that. So someone may say, what level of harm? Whether it's a job, whether it's a wife, whether it's a husband. So we have to balance it out, because at the same time there is also ayahs which say if they cannot establish or preserve the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hudud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning the laws and guidance, the limits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He has set for a family or marriage, etc., then there's no blame on them if they separate, right? So it's not like you're going to commit suicide and you should stick with it. Like your marriage is so bad that, you know, you're going mentally ill, or you're gonna harm yourself, or you can't function, you can't go to work. You know, it's not saying that no matter what, you got to stick with it. No, there's a balance to it. It's on the level where it's nothing major. You know, some things are difficult. She's not everything you expected. You know, she has some weaknesses. She has some annoying habits. She has some things that you dislike, right? But it's not a marriage breaker. It's not going to kill you, right? It's not, it's not massive. It's not a big deal. It's not a crisis. Stick with that. Be patient. This is what the ayah is saying. We have a balance, of course, and vice versa with the woman towards the man as well. Same thing. Be patient, stick with it. But no one's saying endanger your life, endanger your mental health, endanger all of that, and then just end up crazy. No, there is a balance. But generally, the first thing is to try, overcome it, because what you see, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically saying is that oftentimes in many things, not just in marriage, in other relationships, in business, in work, in da'wah, in trying to implement Islam in your own lives, to stay within the guidance, you will see on appearance it's going to be difficult. There's things that you dislike, things that you don't like about this path or this action or this choice. But you have to do it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded you to do it. So in those situations, be patient. At first you might see only the negative sides of it. But be patient if it's within the boundaries, if it's in accordance to the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's something recommended, something praiseworthy in the deen, inshallah you will see the khair of it eventually. In the next ayah number 20, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنْ أَرَدْتُمُ اسْتِبْدَالَ زَوْجٍ مَكَانَ زَوْجٍ وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْتَارًا فَلَا تَأْخُذُوا مِنْهُ شَيْئًا أَتَأْخُذُونَهُ بُهْتَانًا وَإِثْمًا مُبِينًا. If you desire to replace a wife with another, and you have given the former even a qintar, like a huge amount of money or gold as a dowry, do not take any of it back. Would you still take it unjustly and clearly sinfully? So this ayah commands that when one of you wants to divorce your wife, because you've tried everything, it hasn't worked, you've tried everything, right? You've done, you've been patient, you've tried everything, simply not working, you can't keep the boundaries of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you want to divorce her, or you may just want to divorce her and replace her with somebody else, whatever the case, the husband must not take any portion of the mahar. He must not take any portion of the mahar back, even if it was qintar of money. We mentioned, yarhamkallah, we mentioned in, this word came in Surah Al-Imran previously. It's basically a huge amount of wealth, money, gold, etc. A chest full of gold or a sack full of gold, etc. So we can understand from this ayah that the mahar could be something substantial. It is allowed to give a big mahar as well. If somebody is rich, wealthy, and that's the normal mahar they give, obviously without being extravagant and unnecessarily wasteful, etc. It's not encouraged, but if someone were to do it, it's also allowed. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anh, he used to discourage giving a large mahar, dowry. But later on he changed his view. As some of you may know the story, that Umar radiallahu anh, he saw that people were starting to increase the amount of mahar in his time. And it was much more than what they used to pay when the Prophet was around. So one day he got up on the minbar and he kind of gave nasiha, and to cut a long story short, he basically said that don't give more than 400 dirhams in mahar. Do not pay more than 400 dirhams in mahar. It's not a big amount. It's a small amount. And he was advising them, exhorting them from the minbar. And when he went down from the minbar, a woman from the Quraysh said to him, "O Amirul Mu'mineen, you prohibited people from paying more than 400 dirhams in mahar, in dowry for women." He said, "Yes, I did that." She said, "Have you not heard what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down in the Qur'an?" He said, Which part? Which part of the Qur'an?" She said, "Have you not heard Allah's statement, وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا?" And he said, "Oh Allah, forgive me." Because he knows qintara is more than 400 dirhams. So he went back and stood up on the minbar saying, "I had prohibited you from paying more than 400 dirhams in a dowry for women, so let everyone pay what he likes from his money." And Ibn Kathir says this is a sound isnad. Whatever the case, there may be issues with the narration, or there may not be. I haven't checked. But whatever the case, it is allowed for you to give a large amount. But the point here is not to encourage that for everybody. But the point here in this ayah, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention qintara? The point here is وَآتَيْتُمْ إِحْدَاهُنَّ قِنْطَارًا. The reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the high amount, a large amount, is to show and emphasize that the mahar is the absolute right of the woman. Like he's saying, even if you gave them a room full of gold, a sack full of gold, a chest full of gold, do not take back anything from it. Do not take anything from it, even if it's a huge amount. So this is for emphasis, just to emphasize to the men that regardless of how much you gave them, you do not take anything back, except, as I said, in those situations. But you have no right ordinarily to take it back if you're simply divorcing her just to marry somebody else, or you're just divorcing her in the normal course of things, you cannot take it back. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reaffirms this and re-emphasizes this. أَتَأْخُذُونَهُ بُهْتَانًا وَإِثْمًا مُبِينًا. Would you still take it unjustly and clearly sinfully? Because why is it unjust? Why is it clearly sinful? One, it's her right. The reason why you pay mahar is for the marriage contract. It's a part and condition of the nikah, aqd nikah. Is her right. By the mahar being fulfilled, your contract is sound and fully completed. That's without the contract being completed, you owe a debt. Whether you name the mahar or not, whether you name it or you don't name it, the mahar is automatically owed to the woman. So it's a sin because it's her right, it's her property, her wealth, and now you're trying to harm her or you're trying to unjustly take that money back from her. Number two, it's a sin and injustice. Reason is because the only situation you could do that is when somebody's disobedient, like I said, done something huge, puts the whole household in crisis. Like the majority said, if somebody committed adultery and you had to break the marriage, you could ask for the money back. Or somebody did some kind of rebellion in that sense, in that scale, and then you could ask for the money back. So this woman hasn't done any of that. If you asked for the money back and you force her, you're treating her like the woman who has committed adultery. So this is a big injustice, big sin. They are not the same. You don't treat her like the one who has committed adultery or committed a grave sin. So this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it's a question, it's a rhetorical question. Not a rhetorical question. In Arabic, the question mark comes for many reasons. Sometimes it's rhetorical, but within rhetorical, he's not asking for an answer. Sometimes there's different reasons why the question is asked. Here, they said it's for inkar and tawbih, they say. Like, is to reprimand or rebuke, right? But here, Allah's saying clearly why is to be reprimanded, why someone should be censured or criticized for taking it. He said it clearly, because are you going to take it even though it's unjustly and clearly, openly sinful? And then the next ayah, 21, وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ وَقَدْ أَفْضَى بَعْضُكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ وَأَخَذْنَا مِنْكُمْ مِيثَاقًا غَلِيظًا. And how could you take it back after having enjoyed each other intimately and she has taken from you a firm commitment? Again, a re-emphasis just on this mahar. You saw in the last ayah the mahar, this ayah the mahar, the last bit of the last ayah the mahar, that you cannot take the mahar back. In an ordinary course of things, if the divorce happened normally without any blame on her and she didn't ask for it, you cannot take the mahar back. It's absolute right of the woman. So you can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again emphasizing, re-emphasizing, and again, وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ. Again, a question here. Again, the question is not because Allah is looking for an answer. It's like in our ordinary language, we say, how could you do that? We're not looking for an explanation. We're not saying, tell me, explain to me. We're saying, I didn't expect that of you. This is, this is something unbelievable. How could you do that? How could you do such a thing? You're disappointed, you're rebuking them, you're criticizing them. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing. وَكَيْفَ تَأْخُذُونَهُ. How could you take it back? This is tawbih again, inkar. After having enjoyed each other intimately, meaning you've consumed the marriage, you had the contract, you've had intimate relations, and the whole basis of the mahar is as a part of fulfilling the conditions of the contract. You've gone into each other, intimate relations. How could you take it back? Especially that has happened, and she took from you a firm commitment. What is that commitment? That the bond of marriage, the contract of marriage. That you will pay her the mahar as part of the contract of marriage, and you took that commitment in front of people, in front of witnesses. How could you take this back? In another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, in Muslim and Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said 3 times to the spouses who did mula'ana. Mula'ana is when a husband accuses the wife or perhaps sees something and he accuses her of being unfaithful, right? Having some relation outside marriage, something of that nature. But he hasn't got 4 witnesses, he hasn't got any other evidence, etc., etc. And then they go to the court or the judge and they both take oaths that I'm speaking the truth. You know, and there's a number of times you do it, 4 times. And then you have to call for the curse of Allah on yourself if you are lying. Right? This is mula'ana. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said to a couple who did that, he said that Allah knows that one of you is a liar. You know, either the one who's accusing or the accused, because they're both denying it. Right? The one who's accused or the one who's accused is saying that she did this and she's denying it. Right? So they both can't be right. One of them is not telling the truth. So the Prophet ﷺ said, Allah knows that one of you is a liar. So would any of you repent? Allahu ya'lamu anna ahadakuma kadhibun. فَهَلْ مِنْكُمَا تَائِبٌ. Allah knows that definitely one of you is lying. But is there any amongst you, one of you too, who's prepared to repent and own up? The man then said, O Messenger of Allah, my money, referring to the dowry that he gave his wife. The Prophet ﷺ said, you have no money. Meaning he's already claiming, he's saying, I gave a big dowry, or I gave a dowry, I gave a mahr. I want that back because she's unfaithful to me. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you have no money. If you are the one who said the truth, if you are truthful when she did that, the dowry is in return for the right to have intimacy with her, and you've already done that. If you are the one who uttered the lie, then this money is even further from your reach. This money is even further from your reach. In both cases, because there's no proof, in both cases, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, stay away from the mahar. Basically, just to emphasize the absolute right of the woman to the mahar. So as we saw in these 3 ayahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited and banned the jahiliyyah practice, the days of ignorance of inheriting women as property within the family and people marrying their stepmothers, etc., etc. Or inheriting them and then not, just holding them as a prisoner, just to inherit them if they die, or for them to pay them something for their freedom, for their release. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibited that in the first ayah. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it very clear that, about the mahar, that if you pay something, whatever you pay, whatever you pay as mahar, it's not halal, it's not allowed for you to take anything back. It's not allowed for you to take anything back, and to live with them with ma'roof, to treat the women, the wives, with justice, fairness, compassion, with mercy. And that if you find something you dislike, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made something great in that, goodness in that. Perhaps at the end you will see the fruits of it. Perhaps in the dunya you'll see it, and in the akhirah, or perhaps through another means in the dunya, and definitely you'll see it in the akhirah if you're patient, if you overlook that. And then, of course, lastly, what we just covered now, again re-emphasizing those points. So with these 3 ayahs, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala summarizes those few rules and regulations to do with women. So we'll stop here, inshallah, today. We'll carry on with the next ayahs from ayah number 22, inshallah, next week.